I walked outside and saw a bulldozer tearing straight through my ranch. No warning, no permits, no permission. Just a giant machine carving a road right through the middle of my land like I didn't even exist. It was the HOA, of course. They wanted easier access to the other side of the neighborhood, and apparently, my private property was just in their way. So when I blocked it off and told them to stay off my land, they did the unthinkable. They sued me. Sued me for protecting what was mine. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't just going to fight back. I had a plan. A plan that would not only shut them down but completely dismantle them in court. This is the story of how I turned their arrogance into their downfall. I've always believed that land holds memories. My ranch isn't just dirt and fences, it's legacy. This place has been in my family for generations, passed down from my grandfather who built the first fence post with his bare hands. Every tree, every trail, every corner of this land carries a story. For years, it's been my sanctuary. I saved up, poured every ounce of my energy and money into preserving it, into keeping the spirit of the land alive. Sunrise coffee on the porch, the sound of cattle in the distance, the soft rustle of wine through the grass. This ranch was my peace, my pride, and my purpose. I never once imagined that someone would have the audacity to threaten it, let alone tear through it without a single word. Out here, land is sacred. It's not something you just bulldoze through like it's empty space on a map. So when someone crossed that line, literally, I knew I couldn't just sit back and watch my family's legacy get paved over. Life on the ranch is simple, honest, and quiet, the kind of peace you can't buy in the city. Out here, the day starts before the sun rises. The first sounds you hear aren't traffic or sirens, but the soft lowing of cattle, the chirping of birds, and the wind sweeping gently across the open fields. My livestock are more than just animals. They're part of the rhythm of this life. I feed them, walk the fence lines, check the water troughs, and ride out under the wide sky, feeling completely free. There's no honking, no chaos, just nature and routine. On most days, I'll watch deer cross the edge of the property, or spot hawks gliding above the tree line. It's a lifestyle that keeps you grounded, where every chore has meaning and every sunset feels earned. People think it's hard work, and it is. But it's the kind of work that feeds the soul. Out here, time slows down. And for me, there's nothing more sacred than the quiet freedom this land offers. Just a few miles down the road from my ranch sits a neatly packed suburban neighborhood, the kind with cookie-cutter houses, manicured lawns, and a homeowners association that likes to think it runs the world. Their community is tidy, sure, but it's ruled by a board that lives for rules, fees, and control. They've got regulations for everything: how tall your grass can be, what color your curtains are, even how long your car can be parked outside. And while they live in their neatly trimmed little world, I've always kept my distance. My ranch isn't part of their development. Never was, never will be. I'm on my own land, with my own title and my own rules. We've never had any real interaction beyond a polite wave when someone drives by. So you can imagine my shock when they suddenly decided they had some sort of claim to what was clearly my property. They weren't my neighbors, they were strangers with clipboards and attitudes, and they had no business bringing their suburban politics onto my land. I've always been the kind of person who keeps to myself. Out here on the ranch, that's just how it is. You mind your business, you respect your land, and you expect the same in return. I never had much contact with the folks from the nearby HOA community, and frankly, I preferred it that way. We lived different lives. Where they worry about lawn decor and noise complaints, I focus on livestock, fencing, and keeping the land healthy. Sure, we'd exchange a wave here and there if someone from the neighborhood passed by on the road, but that was about the extent of it. I wasn't looking to be part of their meetings, their drama, or their endless list of rules. I figured as long as I respected their space and they respected mine, we'd never have a problem. But clearly, they didn't see it that way. One morning, I noticed a couple of guys in safety vests poking around near the edge of my property line. At first, I thought maybe they were utility workers checking the county lines or doing some harmless maintenance, so I didn't think much of it. But the next day, they were back, This time with clipboards, measuring wheels, and bright orange markers they were sticking into the ground. That's when the alarm bells started ringing. I walked out to ask what they were doing, and one of them mumbled something about future development alignment. I told them flat out they were on private property and asked who sent them. They said it was through a request from the local HOA. That got my attention real quick. I wasn't part of their neighborhood, and I sure hadn't given anyone permission to set foot on my land. They packed up and left after I pressed them, but the damage was already done. That was the moment I realized something wasn't right, and that this wasn't just a casual mistake. Something bigger was going on, and I was going to find out what. A few days after spotting those surveyors near my boundary, I ran into a neighbor at the local feed store, one of the few folks from the HOA side who's always been polite. We got to talking, and he casually mentioned that the HOA was improving infrastructure and planning a new walking trail to connect parts of the neighborhood. He said it like it was nothing, like they were just adding a bike rack or planting new flowers. But something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me. I asked if he knew where the trail was supposed to go, and he shrugged, saying, "Somewhere past the creek, near your fence line, I think." That's when the pieces started falling into place. Suddenly, those surveyors made a lot more sense, and none of it was good. I knew right then that the HOA was planning something that would directly affect my land, and they hadn't bothered to talk to me about it. They weren't asking, they were assuming. And I don't take kindly to being left out of conversations that involve my own property. At first, I tried to brush it off. I figured maybe they were just getting ahead of themselves, planning something that had nothing to do with me. I mean, why would the HOA bother with my land? I'm not part of their little suburban world, and I've got clear property boundaries that go back decades. So I let it go, thinking maybe it was just noise. But then, one morning, I rode out to check the fence line like I always do, and that's when I saw them. Bright orange stakes, hammered right into the ground on my side of the property. Lined up in a neat little row like breadcrumbs leading toward the creek. My stomach dropped. That wasn't just a mistake. That was a message. Someone had walked onto my land without permission and marked it like it was theirs to claim. Suddenly, this wasn't just rumors or surveyors on the edge. This was a direct move on my ranch. And I knew right then and there, something big was coming, and I had to be ready for a fight. I wasn't about to let those stakes sit there like they belonged, so I marched right over to the edge of my property and waited until I saw one of the workers show up again. When I confronted him, he looked a little nervous but quickly told me he was just following instructions from the HOA. I asked what kind of instructions gave them the right to mark my land, and that's when he dropped the phrase that lit a fire under me. "The HOA has rights of access." I stared at him, trying not to lose it. "Rights of access?" I asked. "According to who?" He fumbled through a folder, flipping papers, but nothing had my name on it. No easement, no signatures, nothing with a legal stamp, just a vague map and a highlighted line that ran straight through my ranch. I told him flat out they were trespassing and that if anyone else stepped foot on my property again without proof of legal access, I'd call the sheriff. He shrugged, apologized, and backed off, but I could tell he didn't fully understand the mess he was part of. That was the moment I realized the HOA wasn't just careless. They were trying to push their way onto my land, hoping I'd be too quiet or too tired to fight back. They were dead wrong. It was early, barely past sunrise, when I heard it. That deep, guttural rumble of machinery echoing through the trees. At first, I thought maybe one of the neighbors was doing work on their place, but then it got louder and closer. I dropped my coffee, threw on my boots, and bolted out the door. What I saw made my blood boil. A bulldozer, an actual, full-size bulldozer, was crawling across my pasture, pushing dirt, tearing through the grass, and heading straight for the creek. Behind it was a crew marking the trail, as if this was all part of some approved construction project. My fencing had already been ripped down, and a wide dirt path was being carved right through the middle of my land, without a single word of warning. I ran out waving my arms, yelling at the crew to stop. Some of them looked stunned, others acted like I was the one causing a scene. One guy tried to tell me again that it was all authorized by the HOA. I nearly laughed in disbelief. I couldn't believe the arrogance, the sheer audacity of tearing through private property without any permission. That wasn't just disrespect. That was war. I stood there in absolute disbelief as the construction crew continued their work, laying down gravel and carving a path straight through my pasture like they owned the place. It wasn't just some temporary trail. They were building a full-blown road, wide enough for vehicles, cutting my land in two like it was some forgotten piece of public property. The grass was gone, my fences had been bulldozed aside, and even some of the trees that had stood on my family's land for generations were already uprooted. I could see where they were going with it, right down toward the creek, which meant they planned to connect their suburban neighborhood to the county road that runs behind my ranch. And all of this? Done in broad daylight, without a single conversation, notice, or permit posted anywhere. It was like they assumed I was too quiet, too out of the way, or too old school to push back. But this land is my livelihood. My cattle graze here. My family walks these fields. And now, a gravel road was slicing it all in half. That wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a blatant violation. And I knew right then they had messed with the wrong person. My livestock were terrified, scattering across the property in every direction. The sound of heavy machinery and shouting had them in a panic. Fences I had spent years maintaining were crushed and broken like twigs. Trees I'd planted with my own hands gone. Uprooted. The land I cared for, shaped, and lived on was torn apart in a single morning without a single ounce of respect. The landscape was ruined, the peace destroyed, and all for what? Some unauthorized road the HOA decided they were entitled to build through my ranch. That was the moment I knew, this wasn't just about land anymore. This was war. I ran toward the crew, yelling over the roar of the bulldozer, demanding to know what the hell they were doing on my land. One of them barely looked at me and just shrugged. "We have orders from the HOA," he said, like that somehow made it okay. No apology, no explanation, just blind obedience to a group of paper pushers who thought they could trample all over my rights. My land. My home. At that moment, it hit me, they weren't just ignoring me. They didn't care. They thought the HOA's word carried more weight than the law. But they were about to learn that on my property, the rules are different, and I wasn't going down without a fight. Furious, and still trying to believe this was some kind of mistake, I contacted the HOA directly. I sent emails, left voicemails, even showed up at their little office during their so-called business hours. And you know what I got? Silence. Or worse, condescending replies telling me they'd look into it, or that I must be confused about the property lines. They dismissed everything I said like I didn't matter. Like my land, my livestock, and my rights were just inconvenient obstacles to their little neighborhood plans. That's when I realized they weren't going to fix this. They didn't care. And if I wanted justice, I'd have to take it into my own hands. So I rolled up my sleeves and started digging. If the HOA wasn't going to listen, I'd let the facts do the talking. I pulled every land deed, county map, and property record I could get my hands on. Spent hours cross-referencing boundary lines, surveying documents, and legal filings. And sure enough, just like I suspected, the road they'd bulldozed cut straight through land that was unquestionably mine. No easements, no permissions, no legal right-of-way. They hadn't just made a mistake, they had violated property law in black and white. And that's when my plan started to take shape, because now I had the proof, and soon, I'd have the power to bring their entire operation crashing down in court. Turns out, I own that land outright. Every square inch of it. No shared easements, no loopholes, no gray areas. The road they carved through? Completely on my property. And the HOA? They had zero legal access to it. Not a single document gave them the right to touch it, let alone bulldoze through it. That discovery changed everything. What they did wasn't just overreach, it was trespassing, destruction of private property, and a blatant abuse of power. And now, armed with the truth and the paperwork to back it up, I was ready to turn the tables. They thought I was just a stubborn landowner standing in their way, but they were about to find out I was something much worse, a landowner with a case, a lawyer, and nothing left to lose. With the deeds in hand and the law on my side, I decided it was time to confront them, formally. I sent detailed emails with attached maps and legal documents. I followed up with phone calls, voicemails, and certified letters. No more being ignored. No more pretending this was some kind of misunderstanding. And when that didn't get the reaction it should have, I took it a step further. I showed up at the next town meeting. I stood up in front of the board, the community, and the very people who thought they could bulldoze my life without consequence. I laid it all out: the illegal construction, the property violation, the total disregard for the law. Faces went pale. Whispers filled the room. The HOA president tried to deflect, but the damage was done. They'd been exposed, publicly, legally, and with no way out. But instead of taking responsibility, they doubled down. The HOA had the audacity to accuse me of obstruction, claiming I was standing in the way of a community project. That's what they called it. A bulldozed road through my ranch, destroying my fences, terrifying my animals, and ripping apart land I've cared for all my life, and they had the nerve to frame that as some noble effort for the greater good. It was infuriating. They painted me as the villain, the difficult landowner, who refused to cooperate. But the truth was simple: they broke the law, and now they were trying to twist the narrative to save face. What they didn't realize was that their lies were only digging them deeper, and I was ready to bury them with the truth. So I did what any rightful landowner would do: I took action. I brought in a crew and had a heavy-duty gate installed right across the road they carved through my land. No more free access, no more trespassing, no more pretending this was their property. I added reinforced barriers on both ends, with clear signs that read, "Private property, no HOA access." And let me tell you, it didn't take long for the calls and emails to start flooding in. Suddenly, the same people who had ignored me for weeks were demanding explanations, throwing around threats, and scrambling to regain control. But it was too late. They thought they could run over me. Now they couldn't even get past my gate. Then one morning, just as I was feeding the livestock, a man in a suit walked up my driveway and handed me an envelope. I'd been served. The HOA was officially suing me, claiming I was blocking community access and damaging public works. Public works? On my land? The very land they tore through without permission? It was laughable, if it weren't so infuriating. They twisted the truth into some fantasy where I was the villain for defending what was rightfully mine. But I didn't panic. I knew the law was on my side, and if they wanted a fight in court, well, I was more than ready to give them one. In their lawsuit, they went all in, claiming that the road was essential to the future development of the community. According to them, my property had become a critical access point, and by blocking it, I was causing a nuisance to the neighborhood. Nuisance. That's the word they used to describe a man protecting his own land from illegal construction. They painted their expansion plans as noble, forward-thinking, and necessary, and me as the unreasonable obstacle in the way of progress. It was outrageous. They weren't just ignoring my rights. They were now trying to erase them entirely in court. But what they didn't understand was that I had every legal document, every photo, and every shred of proof stacked neatly on my side, and I wasn't backing down. That's when I decided it was time to lawyer up. I wasn't going to let a group of power-hungry board members bulldoze my rights, literally or legally. I hired a seasoned property attorney, someone who'd gone toe-to-toe with HOAs before and knew every inch of the law they were trying to twist. We gathered all the evidence: property deeds, photos of the destruction, survey maps, even satellite images showing just how far they had crossed the line. My lawyer looked at everything, then looked at me and said, "They don't have a case." "But you do." That was all I needed to hear. Now it wasn't just about defending my land, it was about holding them accountable for every inch they stole. Court dates were set, and the moment that happened, the entire neighborhood started buzzing. Whispers spread like wildfire. Some people were shocked the HOA was being challenged, Others quietly cheered me on. Turns out, I wasn't the only one they'd pushed around. Neighbors I barely knew started stopping by, sharing their own horror stories of fines, threats, and bullying by the board. For the first time, the HOA wasn't the one in control. They were being dragged into the spotlight, and people were watching. Their so-called community leaders were now defendants in a case they never expected to face. And me? I was ready to make sure everyone saw exactly what they had done. As the court date approached, I went into full preparation mode. I gathered every piece of evidence I could find, starting with the official land records that clearly outlined my property boundaries. I pulled out time-stamped photos showing the untouched land before the HOA's bulldozers rolled in, followed by images of the destruction: broken fences, uprooted trees, torn-up pastures. I even had video footage of the construction crews trespassing and ripping through my ranch, claiming they had orders from the HOA. And the worst part? I had photos of injured livestock, my animals spooked and hurt by the chaos they caused. Every document, every image, every frame of video became a nail in the HOA's legal coffin. I wasn't just defending my land anymore. I was exposing the truth. In court, the HOA tried to twist the narrative one last time. Their attorney stood up with a smug expression and argued that they had implied access to the land, some vague, unwritten understanding they claimed had existed for years. Then they pointed to an old, outdated easement document that had nothing to do with my property, and everything to do with land that hadn't even been part of the neighborhood in decades. It was a desperate attempt to justify the road they had illegally bulldozed through my ranch. But the judge wasn't buying it, not with the mountain of evidence we had laid out. Their so-called easement was irrelevant, and their implied access argument fell apart under scrutiny. The courtroom shifted. Their confidence cracked. And for the first time, the HOA realized they were losing control. Then it was our turn. My lawyer stood up, calm and collected, and laid out the facts with precision. He presented the land records, crystal clear and current, proving without a doubt that there was no easement, no right-of-way, and absolutely no permission ever granted for anyone to build or cross my property. He showed the judge the surveyor's maps, the official county documents, and the satellite images, all confirming that the HOA had zero legal claim. The room went silent. Every argument the HOA had thrown out crumbled under the weight of cold, hard truth. The judge leaned forward, reviewing the documents carefully, and it was written all over his face: the HOA had no leg to stand on. And everyone in that courtroom knew it. And then came the most devastating part of our case: the photos. I stood up and handed the judge a series of images that told the story better than words ever could. There were shots of my fences, once strong and secure, now crushed and scattered like debris. Pictures of deep tire ruts carved through my pasture, trees ripped from the ground, and worst of all, my livestock. My animals, frightened, injured, huddled in corners of land they no longer recognized. One image showed a young calf with a gash on its leg from torn wire fencing. Another showed my horses pacing nervously near the construction equipment, eyes wide with fear. The courtroom was silent as the images were passed around. These weren't just property violations, they were personal. They were proof that the HOA didn't just cross a legal line, they trampled everything I cared about. Then came the moment that sealed their fate. A county official took the stand. Calm and direct, he testified that the HOA had never filed the proper permits for any road construction on or near my property. No applications, no inspections, nothing. According to the county records, the entire project was unauthorized from the start. The official even confirmed that if the HOA had applied, it would have been immediately denied due to protected agricultural zoning on my land. The courtroom shifted. You could see the color drain from the HOA board's faces. Their entire defense, that this was a legitimate community improvement, collapsed in seconds. This wasn't just a legal misstep. It was a blatant, reckless overreach. And finally, it was all on the record. Finally, after all the arguments were made and the evidence laid bare, the judge leaned forward, looked directly at the HOA's table, and delivered the verdict. He ruled in my favor, completely and unequivocally. He stated that the HOA had no legal right to access, construct, or alter anything on my land, and that their actions amounted to trespassing and property destruction. The courtroom was dead silent, except for the sound of the gavel coming down. I won. All the stress, the sleepless nights, the damage to my home and animals, it had all led to this moment of justice. The HOA sat frozen, their arrogance shattered. And me? I walked out of that courtroom knowing I didn't just defend my land, I proved that standing your ground still matters. But the judge didn't stop at just siding with me, he dropped the hammer. The court ordered the HOA to completely remove the illegal road they built across my land, down to the last inch of gravel. On top of that, they were required to pay for every bit of the damage they caused, the broken fences, the ruined landscape, even the veterinary costs for my injured livestock. And if that wasn't enough, the cherry on top was this: they had to cover all of my legal fees. Every dollar I spent fighting them, they now owed. The smug looks were gone. The HOA board members sat in stunned silence, realizing their abuse of power had finally come with a price, one they'd be paying for a very long time. As the judge delivered the final ruling, the entire courtroom seemed to exhale. You could feel the shift in the air. A few gasps echoed through the crowd, followed by whispers and exchanged glances. Some people, especially those who had been quietly rooting for me, nodded in approval, even smiled. But the real moment was watching the HOA board. Their faces said it all. The president slumped back in his seat, staring blankly at the floor. One member buried her face in her hands, while another just shook his head in disbelief. The arrogance, the smug superiority they carried for so long, it all vanished. Right there in that room, they weren't the ones in control anymore. Justice had spoken, and for once, the little guy won. As I stepped out of that courtroom, I finally let myself breathe, really breathe, for the first time in weeks. The weight that had been pressing on my chest, the anger, the stress, the endless fight to protect what was mine, it all lifted. I looked up at the sky, felt the sun on my face, and knew I had done the right thing. Not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been pushed around by people who think power gives them the right to take. They thought they could walk over me. Instead, they woke up a man who knew his rights, and refused to be silent. And that day, justice didn't just visit the courtroom. It came home with me. Weeks later, the sound of bulldozers returned, but this time, they weren't there to destroy. They were there to undo. Under court order, the HOA had to rip out every inch of that illegal road. Gravel, concrete, debris, all of it hauled away as if it had never been there. And slowly, the land began to heal. I rebuilt the fences, reseeded the grass, and watched as my livestock started to roam peacefully again. Trees were replanted. The scars began to fade. What they tried to claim as theirs was now fully restored to what it had always been, mine. Standing at the edge of that pasture, looking over the quiet, open field, I knew one thing for certain: no one would ever steal a piece of my life again. The fallout came fast. Once the ruling was public, the HOA board faced a storm of backlash from the very community they claimed to represent. Homeowners were furious, not just about the lawsuit, but about the lies, the wasted money, and the embarrassment it brought on the entire neighborhood. At the next HOA meeting, people showed up in record numbers, demanding answers, accountability, and change. Some board members tried to defend their actions, but their words fell flat. A few couldn't even look the crowd in the eye. And by the end of that week, the pressure became too much. Whispers of resignations turned into announcements. One by one, board members began stepping down, their power stripped away not by force, but by the very people they had once ruled over. Justice didn't just happen in the courtroom, it was happening at home too. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. Neighbors started coming up to me. Some offered quiet nods of respect, others stopped to say a simple but sincere "thank you." A few even apologized for not speaking up sooner, admitting they had been too afraid of crossing the HOA. One elderly couple brought over a homemade pie, saying they'd lived in fear of the board for years and were glad someone finally stood up to them. The same people who once kept their distance were now cheering me on, not with loud celebrations, but with genuine gratitude. I wasn't just the guy who fought back. I became proof that standing up for yourself can make a difference for everyone around you. With the dust finally settling, I took one last step to make sure this never happened again. I secured my property for good. I installed high-resolution security cameras around the perimeter, each one motion-activated and backed up to the cloud. Clear, weatherproof signs now line the fence. Private property, no trespassing, under 24/7 surveillance. I wasn't taking any more chances. What the HOA did taught me a hard lesson. Even when you're in the right, you have to be ready to defend it. Now, my land is protected, my boundaries are crystal clear, and anyone thinking about testing them again? They'll have more than just a lawsuit to worry about. This is my home, and it stays that way. In the end, I didn't just repair the damage, I rebuilt everything they tore down, and I made it better than before. Stronger fences now surround the property, reinforced and lined with native plants to restore the natural beauty they tried to destroy. The pasture has never looked greener, the trees are growing back taller, and my animals roam freely and safely again. I even added a small pond, something I'd always dreamed of, as a reminder that out of chaos, something good can still grow. The land they tried to bulldoze is now a symbol of resilience, proof that no matter how hard they pushed, I pushed back harder. And I came out stronger, prouder, and more rooted in my home than ever before. At the end of the day, this wasn't just about fences, roads, or lawsuits. It was about standing up for what's right. Too often, people let intimidation, red tape, or the fear of conflict stop them from defending what's theirs. But sometimes you have to draw the line, literally, and say, enough is enough. I didn't back down when they trespassed, destroyed my land, and tried to bully me into silence. I stood my ground, I fought with facts, and I proved that the little guy isn't so little when he knows his rights. This fight wasn't just for me, it was for every property owner who's ever been pushed around by people who think power gives them permission. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: know your rights, stand your ground, and never let anyone take what's yours without a fight. This whole experience opened my eyes to something a lot of people are just starting to realize. HOAs, while created to maintain order and standards, can easily overreach and abuse their power. They often operate with little oversight, making decisions that impact homeowners' lives, land, and peace of mind. What starts as simple rule enforcement can quickly spiral into intimidation, legal threats, and outright bullying. They act like they own the neighborhood, when in reality, they're just elected volunteers with limited authority. But when no one stands up to them, they push boundaries, sometimes literally. My story is just one example, but it's happening everywhere. That's why it's more important than ever to question, to challenge, and to fight back when they cross the line. Because if they can do it to me, they can do it to anyone. If there's one lesson I learned through all of this, it's the importance of knowing your land rights and documenting everything. Too many people trust that things will be handled fairly, until they're blindsided by bulldozers or buried in legal threats. But the truth is, your property lines, deeds, and zoning laws are your first line of defense. Because when the fight starts, emotion won't win your case, evidence will. Keep records. Take photos. Save emails. Know exactly where your land begins and ends, and what the law says you can do with it. That knowledge is power. It's what stopped the HOA from stealing a piece of my life, and it's what ultimately helped me win. If you own land, protect it like it matters, because it does. I never wanted a fight. I wasn't looking for drama, and I certainly didn't want a war. All I wanted was to live in peace, take care of my land, and be left alone. But they brought the battle to my doorstep, bulldozing through fences, tearing up the ground I worked hard to maintain, and acting like my property was theirs to use. I didn't start this war, but once it began, I had no choice but to finish it. They underestimated how far I'd go to defend what was mine. And in trying to push me out, they only pushed me to push back harder. This wasn't just about land, it was about respect, boundaries, and standing up to people who thought they could walk all over me. They started it, but I ended it. On my terms. Ever dealt with a nightmare HOA? One that pushed too far, ignored your rights, or made you feel like a prisoner on your own property? Drop your story in the comments. I read them all. Seriously, your experiences matter, and you're not alone. Whether it's something small or a battle that nearly broke you, this channel is a place to be heard. And who knows, your story might be the next one we bring to light. Let's keep standing up, speaking out, and showing HOAs everywhere that homeowners won't be bullied anymore. If this story fired you up, made you cheer, or just reminded you that justice can still win, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I've got plenty more real stories coming your way, where the underdog fights back and the bullies finally get what's coming to them. You don't want to miss what's next, because around here, we don't just tell stories, we tell victories. And remember, just because someone acts like they're in charge doesn't mean they are. Titles, boards, and loud voices don't override the law or your rights. Stand firm, stay informed, and never let anyone pave their path through your peace. Your land, your rules, and no one takes that from you without a fight.